Your parents bought their first house on a single income. You can't afford rent on two. Your grandfather retired at 62 with a pension. You'll be working at 72 with a 401k. You don't understand. In 1985, the median home cost 3 times the median household income. Today, it costs nearly 8 times. The middle class isn't struggling because they're lazy or financially irresponsible. They're struggling because the math changed, the rules changed, and nobody announced it. This isn't a story about people making bad decisions. It's a story about a system that quietly redistributed wealth upward while telling an entire generation they just needed to work harder. Let's start with something simple, a paycheck. In 1970, if you made $50,000, you could buy a house, support a family, save for retirement, and still have money left over. That same $50,000 today, you're one car repair away from credit card debt. The problem isn't the number on your pay stub, it's what that number can actually buy. Between 1979 and 2020, productivity in the United States increased by 61%, worker pay increased by 17%. That gap, that's not an accident, that's a feature. Corporations made more, shareholders made more, executives made significantly more. The people doing the work, they got cost of living adjustments that didn't keep up with the actual cost of living. Here's the trick. Inflation is measured by the Consumer Price Index. The CPI tracks prices for a basket of goods, food, gas, clothing, electronics, and by that measure, inflation has been relatively modest, around 2 to 3% most years. But the CPI doesn't weigh housing the way most Americans experience it. It doesn't fully account for healthcare costs. It doesn't capture education expenses. It doesn't reflect what it actually costs to maintain a middle-class life. So wages go up 2%, rent goes up 8%, health insurance premiums go up 5%, college tuition goes up 6%, and you're told inflation is under control. The middle class isn't getting poorer because they're earning less on paper. They're getting poorer because their money buys less life. There are 3 expenses that have completely reshaped what it means to be middle class in America: housing, healthcare, education. In 1960, the median home price was about twice the median household income. You could save for a few years, get a mortgage, and own a house by your late 20s. Today, the median home price is 7 to 8 times the median income. And it's worse in cities where the jobs actually are. This isn't about people wanting granite countertops. This is about math. If your household makes $70,000 and the median home in your area costs $500,000, you need a down payment of at least $50,000 just to avoid PMI. That's years of aggressive saving while paying rent that's also increased faster than wages. The result, home ownership rates for people under 35 have collapsed, and home ownership was the primary wealth building tool for the American middle class. It was how you built equity, how you borrowed against value, how you passed something down. Without it, you're renting forever. And rent doesn't build equity, it builds someone else's equity. Healthcare is the second breakpoint. In 1960, healthcare was about 5% of GDP. Today, it's nearly 18%. The average family now pays over $22,000 per year in premiums, deductibles, and out-of-pocket costs. Even with employer-sponsored insurance, a single hospital stay can generate bills in the tens of thousands. An ambulance ride costs $1,500. An MRI costs $3,000. You can do everything right, have insurance, have savings, and still go bankrupt because someone in your family got sick. And here's the structural trap. Healthcare is tied to employment. Lose your job, lose your coverage. Want to start a business? You're paying $1,800 a month for a family plan on the individual market with a $6,000 deductible. The system doesn't just punish poverty, it punishes risk. The third breakpoint is education. In 1980, the average cost of a 4-year public university was about $7,500. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $25,000 in today's dollars total for 4 years. Today, the average is over $40,000 per year. For 4 years, that's $160,000, and that's public school. Student loan debt in the United States is now over $1.7 trillion. The average borrower owes $37,000, but plenty owe 6 figures. And unlike almost every other kind of debt, you can't discharge it in bankruptcy. So you graduate at 22 with a degree, a debt load equivalent to a mortgage, and an entry-level salary that hasn't kept pace with tuition inflation. You can't buy a house because you're paying student loans. You can't save for retirement because you're paying student loans. You can't start a family because you're paying student loans. This isn't about avocado toast. This is about systematic cost inflation in the 3 areas that define middle-class stability. Let's talk about retirement, because this is where the quiet betrayal really shows up. Your grandparents had pensions. A pension meant you worked for a company for 30 years, and when you retired, they paid you a percentage of your salary for the rest of your life. It was predictable. It was guaranteed. It didn't depend on the stock market. In 1980, 38% of private sector workers fathers had a pension. Today it's about 12%. What replaced it? The 401k. Here's what most people don't understand. The 401k was never designed to be the primary retirement system. It was created in 1978 as a tax advantage supplement for executives. It was a perk. Then corporations realized they could shift the entire burden of retirement funding onto workers and call it empowerment. With a pension, the company takes the risk. With a 401k, you take the risk. You decide how much to contribute. You decide where to invest. You decide when to rebalance. You absorb the market crashes. You absorb the sequence of returns risk. You absorb the longevity risk. And if you mess it up, that's on you. Most Americans have no idea how much they actually need to retire. The rule of thumb is you need about 25 times your annual spending saved. If you spend $50,000 a year in retirement, you need $1.25 million invested. How many people have that? About 10%. The median 401k balance for Americans aged 55 to 64 is around $65,000. That will generate maybe $2,600 per year using the 4% rule. Social Security adds another $20,000 on average. So you're looking at about $23,000 per year in retirement. That's not middle class. That's barely surviving. And here's the darker part. The people who do have large 401k balances, they're overwhelmingly the ones who didn't need them. High earners, people with stock options, people who could afford to max out contributions every year. The 401k system works great if you're already wealthy. If you're actually middle class, it's a gamble. You're probably losing. Now let's talk about what happened to the people who did get wealthy. Since 2008, the Federal Reserve has kept interest rates near zero for most of the last 15 years. The idea was to stimulate the economy, make borrowing cheap, encourage spending and investment. But here's what actually happened. Cheap borrowing didn't just stimulate the economy. It inflated asset prices. Stocks went up. Real estate went up. Bonds went up. If you owned assets, you got richer. If you didn't, you fell further behind. The S&P 500 has more than quadrupled since 2009. If you had $100,000 invested in 2009, you now have over 400,000. If you didn't have money to invest in 2009 because you were just trying to survive the recession, you missed the entire run. This is the wealth gap everyone talks about, but nobody explains clearly. It's not just about income, it's about assets. Middle class people earn income. Wealthy people own assets. And assets have appreciated faster than wages for decades. If you're a software engineer making $150,000 per year, you're doing well. But if you don't own a home, don't have significant retirement savings, and don't own stock, you're still not building wealth. You're just earning a good salary. Meanwhile, someone who bought a house in 2010 for $300,000 now owns an asset worth $700,000. They didn't work for that appreciation. They just owned something while the Fed inflated asset prices. The middle class got salary adjustments. The wealthy got asset appreciation, and asset appreciation compounds faster than salary growth ever will. Here's what nobody wants to say out loud. America doesn't have one economy anymore. It has two. There's the asset owner economy, people who own homes, stocks, businesses. Their wealth compounds. They benefit from tax advantages. Capital gains are taxed lower than labor. Mortgage interest is deductible. Retirement accounts grow tax deferred. Then there's the paycheck economy. People who work for wages, rent their housing, have no significant investments. They're taxed higher. They have no compounding assets. They're one emergency away from debt. And the system is designed to keep you in the paycheck economy for as long as possible. Credit scores are a perfect example. Your credit score doesn't measure how much money you have. It measures how reliably you pay back debt, and which means the system rewards people for borrowing money and paying interest. If you pay cash for everything, your credit score suffers. If you responsibly use credit and pay it off, your score goes up. The incentive structure is built around keeping you in the borrowing system. Student loans, car loans, credit cards, personal loans. The average American is paying over $700 per month just in interest payments. That's money that could be invested, that could be building wealth, but instead it's going to banks. And if you can't borrow, you're stuck. You can't get a mortgage. You can't lease a decent car. You can't even rent an apartment in some cities without a strong credit score. So the people who need credit the most pay the highest interest rates. And the people who don't need credit at all get the lowest rates. The middle class isn't getting poor because they're irresponsible. They're getting poor because the system is designed to extract wealth from labor and concentrate it in assets. Here's the psychological piece that makes this worse. Americans are told their standard of of living has improved. And in some ways it has. You have a smartphone, you have streaming services, you have cheap consumer goods from Amazon. Technology has made certain things more accessible, but those aren't the things that matter for long-term financial stability. A smartphone costs $1,000, a house costs $500,000, a Netflix subscription costs $15, health insurance costs $1,800 per month. The cheap things got cheaper, the important things got unaffordable, so you have more stuff, more convenience, more entertainment, but you have less security, less stability, less margin for error. This is lifestyle creep, not because you're spending irresponsibly, but because the baseline cost of a middle-class life quietly increased while your perception of progress was managed by access to cheap technology. Your parents didn't have iPhones, but they had pensions, they had affordable housing, they had healthcare that didn't bankrupt them, they had a safety net. You have none of that, but you have a phone that can stream 4K video. That's not progress. That's a distraction. So where does this go? The middle class is shrinking. It's been shrinking for decades. More people are moving into lower income brackets. Fewer people are moving into upper income brackets. The center's collapsing, and the consequences are already showing up. Birth rates are declining because people can't afford kids. Marriage rates are declining because financial instability makes partnership harder. Home ownership is declining because prices are disconnected from wages. This isn't sustainable. A society where half the population can't afford housing, healthcare, and retirement isn't stable. It's pressure building. The system will either adjust or it will break. Maybe housing prices crash and reset affordability. Maybe healthcare costs collapse under political pressure. Maybe student debt gets forgiven or restructured. Maybe wages finally catch up, or maybe none of that happens. Maybe the wealth gap just keeps widening. Maybe the middle class becomes a historical artifact. Maybe we accept a permanent renter class working into their 70s with no real retirement. Nobody knows. But the trajectory is clear. The American middle class isn't failing because individuals made bad choices. It's failing because the structural conditions for middle class stability disappeared while everyone was told to just work harder. Your parents could build a life on one income. You can't build one on two. That's not a personal failure. That's a system failure. And the question isn't whether you're smart enough or disciplined enough to beat the system. The question is whether the system is designed to let you win at all.